வரல. கமெண்ட்ஸ் ஏதாவது இருக்கா? ஹலோ, firstly I would like to thank Sister Nivedita University School of Law for providing me with this opportunity to interact with the students on one of the very important areas in modern times, that is the role of human rights during this massive pandemic. So before dwelling into the topic per se, I would like to give a brief overview of what is human rights and what role could human rights play in curbing the pandemic. So when I discuss or talk about human rights are essentially domestic in character in terms of enforcement, and human rights are also international in character in terms of its doctrines and principles. Now, if you look into modern international law, the development of human rights emerged only post World War II. The acts of World War II prompted an institution called the United Nations to set up an institution for the protection of human rights, and thus emerged what you call as Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Right. So human rights essentially emerged post World War II. So prior to World War II, human rights was considered to be a phenomenon which was essentially domestic in character. Post World War II, the entire corpus of human rights became internationalized. And with the advent of this institution called as United Nations organization, which the primary purpose of this institution was to maintain peace and security. Now, if one looks into the United Nations Charter, what you call as the UN Charter, there were 3 provisions under the UN Charter which discussed about human rights. Firstly, you have a provision under the UN Charter, Article 1, Para 2, Article 55 and Article 56 of the UN Charter. But the unfortunate thing about the UN Charter, which is considered to be or widely recognized as World Constitution, is it did not define the term human rights. So when I talk about human rights, one needs to understand the fact that there is no clarity in terms of the definition of human rights. However, with state practice, you have certain principles which have emerged which are considered to be core principles of human rights. So on the one hand, you have an institution called as United Nations, which supervises the protection of human rights. On the other hand, you have domestic legal mechanism which plays a very important role in the enforcement of human rights. Now, the definition of human rights, the UN Charter was devoid of the definition of human rights. That was because countries like United States, UK, France, Russia, which were instrumental in creating the UN in the first place, were accused of various human rights violations. For instance, UK and France during World War II, they were known for colonial subjugation, right, of the colonial subjugation. And countries like US during later half of the 1940s were notorious for its racial discrimination. So human rights by term or by definition was not defined under the United Nations Charter. So the development of human rights happened only in the year 1966 with two covenants coming to the forefront. One is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The other is the International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights. These two covenants, along with the UN UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was enacted in the year 1948, December 10, were considered to be the International Bill of Rights. So, primarily when one looks into human rights corpus, there are three important documents. One is the UDHR, the other is ICCPR, the third important covenant is the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Economic Rights. So these three international instruments form International Bill of Rights. Along with these instruments, international human rights have also emerged or developed parallelly through regional human rights codes. For instance, as early as 1953, the European Code of Human Rights was established, followed by the Inter-American Code of Human Rights and the African Code of Human Rights. And these human rights codes have played a very, very important or pivotal role in shaping our understanding of human rights. So this is at the international level where you have various covenants, treaties and declarations to protect and safeguard human rights. Now, at the domestic level, I'm just confining to the position of India. In India, we have a very specific legislation, that is the Protection of Human Rights Act, which was enacted in the year 93. And this Protection of Human Rights Act came into existence because of the Vienna Program of Action in the year 93. So at the international level, there was an event that happened in Vienna. The event basically highlighted the importance of human rights, followed by which India enacted a specific legislation, that is the Protection of Human Rights. Under the Protection of Human Rights Act in India in the year 93, it defined the term human rights. So when we talk about coronavirus and human rights, one needs to look into this virus from the perspective of Article 2, 2, Clause 1, Subclass D of the Protection of Human Rights. And the definition is very, very interesting. The Indian definition of human rights mentions or refers to international covenants, that is UDHR, ICCPR and ICCPR. And interestingly, India is a party, India is a signatory to all these international conventions. So India is bound by the principles and terms of these conventions. And these conventions have more or less shaped the practice of India when it comes to international human rights law. Now, when in terms of coronavirus, when the WHO, the World Health Organization, you need to remember that World Health Organization is one of the specialized agencies of UN. UN is considered to be one of the central institutions in international law. A parallel can be drawn to the Constitution of India. In India, we say it's Constitution of India. At the global level, it's the United Nations. And in the United Nations, there are 6 primary organs. And under Article 7 of the UN Charter, the term used is the principal organs of the UN. And these are the General Assembly, Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, the ICJ and the Secretariat. These 6 primary organs of the UN play a very, very crucial role in the protection of human rights across the world. So this is where when there was this corona outbreak, which was declared as a pandemic by the WHO, the matter was taken by the Security Council in the United Nations. Security Council plays a very important role in the maintenance of international peace and security. And whenever a matter pertaining to international peace and security hits the limelight, it's the Security Council which passes a resolution, right, through what we call as the United Nations Security Council resolution. Now, my contention here is when there was this Ebola outbreak in West Africa, in countries like Liberia, which were greatly affected by the Ebola outbreak. The United Nations Security Council was proactive in coming out with the UNSC Resolution 2177, wherein it declared that the Ebola outbreak concerns matter pertaining to international peace and security. But when the similarly, when the matter pertaining to corona was taken up by the Security Council, unfortunately, China, South Africa and Russia opposed to the UNSC resolution. Now, you could see a clear double standard when it came to the Ebola outbreak and the outbreak of corona. Because when you talk about corona, it involved countries like China, which has veto power in the UNSC. So it exercised its veto power to block any UNSC resolution. But when it came to Ebola outbreak, the international community of states were very proactive in passing resolutions to curb the spread of Ebola virus. So UNSC, what I feel is, UNSC has a mandate of protecting peace and security. This is quite evident from the UN Charter Article 24. But unfortunately, when it has come to the corona outbreak, the UNSC, the Security Council of the United Nations, has played a very minor role. Now, the other organ apart from the Security Council is the General Assembly. The General Assembly does studies on human rights under Article 13 of the UN Charter. Now, General Assembly till date, it has been nearly 4 months since the outbreak of corona, has not taken up any discussion pertaining to the coronavirus. So you could see, and it is evident that there is a lack of political and legal will amongst the state to work in tandem to curb the spread of this deadly outbreak. Now, coming to WHO. Now, there is an allegation that the World Health Organization was passive in terms of not proactively taking decision, and in fact it took nearly 3-4 months for the WHO to declare corona outbreak as pandemic. So one needs to understand what role the WHO has played in the spread of this outbreak, and secondly, one has to attribute the responsibility to China. Now, if you look into the writings, especially in the European Journal of International Law, and for the starters, this is one of the leading journals in international law, that is the European Journal of International Law. They have a blog. The blog is the EJIL Talk, European Journal of International Law Talk, and there are plethora of articles on corona outbreak and international responsibility. Now, what happens, let's say a state wants to drag China to the International Court of Justice for whatever violation that it has committed in terms of human rights. Now, let's say assuming that a decision goes against China in the International Court of Justice, which is highly unlikely, the matter would come to the Security Council for the enforcement of the decision. Now, the enforcement of decision is taken by the Security Council. The Security Council would inevitably, under the auspice of China, would go for veto. So my problem is, my entire issue here is, the United Nations has not done sufficiently to protect international human rights. This is one of the major issues that I see today. United Nations, which is considered to be an international institution, which has done tremendously in the past, has failed in its attempt to stop the spread of this virus. This is because the actors involved in spreading this virus are countries who are superpowers. Now, drawing the same analogy to Ebola, in Ebola that was not the case. Now, talking about the various provisions which have been violated, especially international human rights provisions which are being violated. By the way, I'll take your questions at the end of my lecture. So whatever questions you have, kindly keep me posted. At the end of my talk, I'll answer all your questions. Fine. So talking about the human rights conventions which were violated by various countries. And I would start with the provisions in ICCPR. Maybe you could take it down. The first important provision that was violated in ICESCR, International Covenant on the Economic and Social Rights, was Article 12, which talks about the right to health. And as you all know, right to health is considered to be one of the fundamental rights as codified under Article 21 of the Constitution of India. And this right is also enshrined under ICESCR, wherein it is said right to health is a universal right, and it is the duty of the state to protect. It is the duty of the state to protect and safeguard this particular right, and this right is considered to be a human right. So right to health is the first right that a state has to protect in these kind of calamities. But unfortunately, because of the callous attitude of the states, certain states, we have not been able to do sufficient testing. This has led to massive loss of life, and this basic right, which is the right to health, which is enshrined under Article 12, is violated. Now, the state might argue that when it comes to emergency-like situation, it can suspend human rights, right? There is a provision in Article 4 of ICCPR, International Covenant on International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 4, which says that during emergency situations, states are given the authority to suspend certain rights. Now, the problem is countries like India have used this emergency clause that is under Article 4 of ICCPR to suspend some of the basic fundamental right. Now, I'll give you an example. One of the rights which have been suspended is freedom of movement, and freedom of movement is one of the rights which is enshrined under ICCPR and which is considered to be one of the sacrosanct rights. This right is being suspended by India, but not allowing the migrant workers move from one state to other, right? So emergency provision Article 4 of ICCPR, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, is being used by India to suspend certain core fundamental rights. Now, you might ask me whether the state during emergency situation is not entitled to suspend certain rights. The state is entitled to suspend human rights, provided that there has to be certain criteria that needs to be fulfilled. And these criteria are mentioned under General Comment 29. You might ask what General Comment means. Now, under every human rights convention, there is something called as general comments. General comments are basically the interpretations of the provisions under the Human Rights Convention. For instance, there are let's say there is General Comment 31, General Comment 14, General Comment 29, etc. General comments basically interpret the provisions of ICCPR and ICESCR. Now, one of the general comments which says, General Comment, we can take this down, General Comment 29. This is a very important general comment when it comes to the suspension of human rights during emergency. Lot of states, I'm pointing out this vehemently, that is, states are suspending human rights in the name of public security. This is one of the key areas that needs to be looked into. In the name of public security, in the name of national emergency, in case of India, the government has not declared or proclaimed any emergency. Now, there are three kinds of emergency which are codified under the Constitution of India. The government has not proclaimed any kind of emergency. Without proclaiming emergency, the government of India has suspended certain rights. For instance, there is this internet ban in Jammu and Kashmir, right? So this is also a violation of freedom of speech and expression. And freedom of speech and expression is codified under Article 19 of ICCPR. So my point is, in the time of crisis, in the time of pandemic, the government or the government dispensation is violating various kinds of human rights. In short, The first right that is being violated is right to health. Government is not providing mask. This government is not providing universal health care, and universal health care is one of the basic human rights, right? So right to health is being violated. The second right that is being violated is the right to privacy. Now the government has come up with a lot of apps to track the corona outbreak, right? So this essentially violates our right to privacy, which makes inroads into Article 27 or 21 of the Constitution. So our right to privacy is violated, freedom of movement is violated, right to health is violated, right to life is violated, and in essence, all these rights are codified under International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights. Now you might ask whether these covenants are binding to India, because we follow a system wherein we are only bound by the Constitution, right? And when it comes to the enforcement of international human rights law, the important provision that you need to look into is Article 253 of the Constitution, which says when international law has to be followed in India, it has to have the legislative backing. Article 253 of the Constitution. Now, India firstly has signed the ICCPR, and India, although has not ratified it, India has signed ICCPR, and hence it has certain obligation towards international community, right? So India is bound by the violations that it has done when it comes to the various provisions of ICCPR and ICACR. Now, the second important point that I would like to stress here is how far national lockdown could be extended. How far this emergency provision that is invoked by the government could be extended in terms of duration. Now, people say the time period of duration is, it's not adequately, the details are not adequately provided to the people. So now, when I say the restrictions to human rights, there are certain conditions that needs to be followed. The restrictions to human rights has to be non-arbitrary, it has to be non-discriminative, it has to be lawful, and all these conditions have to be satisfied. And this is a position taken by international human rights. For instance, at the international level, you have something called as Siracusa principles. So it is something that you need to read as student of law. You can make a note of this. Siracusa principles. I'll spell it out. SIRACUSA. Siracusa principles. Siracusa principles lay down when human rights can be suspended and what are the criteria that needs to be followed when human rights are to be suspended. Under the Siracusa document, there are 3-4 criteria which are mentioned, and one criteria being the lockdown or the human rights curtailment which is done by the government has to be for a specific duration of time. Now, when the government extends the lockdown periodically in the name of national security, in the name of public health, it needs to bear in mind that it has to balance it with human rights. So human rights should not be casualty when it comes to protection of human rights, right? Now, I remember reading a very interesting report by the Secretary General of the United Nations, and by the way, the Secretary General of the United Nations is considered to be the CEO, that is the Chief Executive Officer of the United Nations. Now, the present Secretary General of the United Nations is Antonio Guterres, and post the outbreak, the Secretary General of the United Nations came up with a very interesting report on how states are to handle this crisis. And the title of this report is We Are All in This Together. This is the title of the report, We Are All in This Together. And the report categorically says that during the time of crisis, the states should not use or should not pass or enact laws which restricts the rights of the minorities. Now, we could clearly see today that we are in a situation where this pandemic is being used to perpetuate violence, to perpetuate hate speech, to perpetuate divide in the society. Now, The statement made by the Secretary General of the United Nations is very, very clear. And the report, the report is titled, we are all together in this. This is the title of the report. I think it's a 23-page report, and there is also video in this audio-visual library. There is something called as the UN Audio-Visual Library. So anyone who's interested in, the United Nations, to know the in and out of United Nations, they could have access to this UN Audio-Visual Library. You will have plenty of lectures on various subject matters of international law, and you will have lectures on United Nations. My point here is, in the name of national security, in the name of protection of health, right to health, state should not use tactics that deprive a citizen of human rights. This is very unfortunate that we are seeing today across the world. Right? It is not only in India, we are seeing this phenomenon across the globe, wherein emergency like situation is being used to perpetuate violence and political agenda. Now, coming to the other aspect, especially the Indian aspect when it comes to human rights, in India we have a very specific act which protects, in the time of pandemic, that is the Epidemic Diseases Act. This act was passed in the year 1897. The Epidemic Diseases Act was passed in the year 1897, and under this act, the state government, under section 2 of this act, clearly states the state government is having the authority to pass any kind of regulation in the time of crisis. The authority is not vested with the central government when it comes to the epidemic diseases. Now you need to understand this particular act, the Epidemic Diseases Act, which came into force in the year 1897, which is the present applicable law when it comes to India. Does not make any inroads when it comes to stopping the spread of outbreak, because firstly the authority is given to the state government, not to the central government. Secondly, whoever violates the provisions of the act, the fine is only 1,000 rupees and 6 months imprisonment. So the point here is, the reality is India does not have any specific legislation to protect, to oversee or to place a check on this outbreak. Now, when you have countries like UK coming up with a specific act to take cognizance of the situation, in UK you have a very, very specific act, that is the Pandemic Act, Corona Pandemic Act, which was recently passed. And in fact, the European Commission or the European Court of Human Rights are taking up cases filed by individuals when there is an allegation that their individual liberty and securities are violated by the states. So there are a lot of cases which are pending in the European Court of Human Rights with regard to individual liberty vis-a-vis COVID-19. So what I feel today is we need to have a delicate balance. There needs to be a delicate balance between human rights and the authority of states to suspend these human rights. Now the problem in India is who places a regulation on all this. We do not have a regulatory body to oversee the action taken or the action taken by the government. Now, Supreme Court of India has given various directives. Now, if you have not read this case, this is a very important case. There was a PIL filed in the Supreme Court of India, and the Supreme Court had given few directions with regard to the COVID warriors, the warriors who are at the forefront to tackle this pandemic. That is the Indian Professional Nurses versus the Union of India. This is the 53-page cases where the Supreme Court of India has given direction with regard to the protection of COVID warriors. So it says, it gives a lot of guidelines with regard to protection. Now, so I'll take your doubts. So whatever doubts you have, I can clarify it. So. So the first question is by Pankaj. You are like censorship, discrimination, arbitrary detention, human rights violation are being observed across globe. Does United Nations human rights have any guidelines defined already to handle human rights violation in Go? Okay. So to answer to your question, so the international institution that looks into the global pandemic is the World Health Organization. And under the World Health Organization, the WHO, as I shortly call it, came up with a regulation in the year 2005, what you call as the International Health Regulations 2005. So under these regulations, there are definite steps that needs to be followed when you are tackling an outbreak like corona. And so one of the accusations made by international community of states are China was in blatant violation of this WHO regulation. But the problem again is, how do you indict a country like China, which is considered to be a superpower and which is a member of P5, right? So I think that answers your question. So the second question is by Pankaj Kumar. So your question is, why do you feel that matter cannot go against China in the ICJ? Now, when you talk about the International Court of Justice, the problem with International Court of Justice is jurisdiction. Now, if you are a student of international law, the International Court of Justice is governed by the statute of the World Court, what we call as the ICJ statute. Under the ICJ statute, Article 36 of the ICJ statute establishes the jurisdiction. There are two kinds of jurisdiction. One is the contentious jurisdiction. The other is the jurisdiction established through special agreement. Now, to drag China to the International Court of Justice is literally impossible. I mean, one could drag China to the ICJ, but it's very difficult to prove the jurisdiction. That is because any state which is willing to drag China to the ICJ has to establish that there is an existence of a dispute. Now, one of the prerequisites to establish jurisdiction in the ICJ is to prove the existence of a dispute. Now, if you look into the overall picture with regard to COVID-19, in the first place, there is no dispute as such between two states. It is an outbreak, and China could always take an exception of force majeure. Force majeure is one of the exceptions which are provided under the draft articles on state responsibility. So China could always invoke that exception and get away in the ICJ. And the second thing is, even though a judgment is passed against China in the ICJ, the matter comes to the Security Council for its enforcement. And in the Security Council, you have China as a permanent member in the Security Council. Naturally, you will have a situation where China would veto it. This has happened in many instances in the past, wherein I remember a case, the 1984 case, the famous US versus Nicaragua, where there was a decision in the ICJ which went against the United States. The matter came to the Security Council, the United States vetoed it. So, taking or dragging China to the ICJ, it might sound utopic, it might sound good, but practically it's not possible because of the I will put it this way, because of jurisdictional constraints, right? Okay. I think Piyush Shah. So you have a question, why are human rights so important to the COVID-19 response? So human rights are always important. There are a lot of scholars say even during armed conflict, human rights should not be suspended. Even during pandemic, human rights should not be suspended. Human rights are important because firstly, human rights are universal. And secondly, human rights cater to the needs of the individuals and groups and minorities, right? So these are the two things or two factors which distinguish human rights from any other regimes in international law. One, it caters to the needs of the individual. There is no other branch of international law other than international refugee law which caters to the needs of the individuals. Human rights caters to the needs of the individual. Secondly, it protects the rights of the minorities, especially the vulnerable groups. When I say vulnerable groups, you have women, children, LGBT. You have umpteen number of conventions which protect these vulnerable groups. And human rights are essentially universal, which are transboundary, which transcends the boundary of one state, right? Please discuss the obligation of China under Ananya. Okay. Please discuss the obligation of China under international health regulations. Now, under the international health regulation, that is in the year 2005, the international health regulations provide for jurisdiction. There are two kinds of jurisdiction. One is the normal jurisdiction under Article 36 of the ICJ statute and advisory opinion. So what can be done here is any organ of the UN, let's say the General Assembly, Security Council, ECOSOC, could request an advisory opinion to the International Court of Justice on specific issues, right? On specific issues wherein what China has violated. So this can be one alternative to dragging China to the ICJ directly, advisory opinions. And International Court of Justice is competent to provide advisory opinion. This is enshrined under Article, if I am right, Article 96 of the UN Charter. Article 96 of the UN Charter talks about advisory opinion, wherein organs of the UN can request an advisory opinion. And of course, it's a discretion of the ICJ to provide advisory opinion, but this effort can be made by organs like the General Assembly. Fine. Okay, so Manisha Ray. What are the human rights of doctors during COVID-19 outbreak? So, I think the government came up with a specific ordinance, and this ordinance was taken into cognizance by the state of Karnataka to protect the doctors, especially in the backdrop of doctors getting beaten up. The government came up with an ordinance to protect the doctors, and anyone violating this norm would be, I think, imprisonment to the maximum of 7 years. So government has come up with an ordinance, although it's not an act, it's an ordinance which protects the frontline workers, and doctors, mind you, have been doing a very, very tremendous job in controlling the outbreak. So this is one of the one of the laws which is available at this point in time. And also the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, I think Michelle Bachelet, made a statement recently where he has said that this outbreak should not mean that the rights of the minorities are being subjugated, and the people who are vulnerable have to be protected, and they should not be ignored. So, okay. So Dibratri Chakraborty. Sir, what are the rights of the people who are in charge of jobs like electricity department? So what I feel is the government has to take a call on this. I think it's a high time that, for instance, United States has pumped in nearly $2 trillion as a stimulus package to get out of this pandemic. But the government, I feel, is not funding enough to subsidize on a lot of things, and it's up to the government to protect or find an alternative to all this crisis. Do you think that somewhere the people of India are missing the freedom of movement in the time of pandemic? Okay, so I think I have addressed this. Freedom of movement is one of the fundamental principles which are codified in International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, if I am right, Article 19 of ICCPR. Article 19 of ICCPR, and India is a signatory to ICCPR. And every 4 years, a state has to submit a report, what we call as Universal Periodic Review. Universal Periodic Review happens every 4 years, wherein states have to submit a report of its human rights track record. And if I am right, India submitted its report in the year 2017, what you call as a Universal Periodic Review, on what it has done to protect human rights, or various kinds of human rights. This particular report, the 2017 report, the UPR report, I think this report was formulated by, I think, from this institution, NLU Delhi, along with the government. Now, India should be submitting this UPR report anywhere in the year 2021. So, I think India would hopefully address the issue of freedom of movement, what it has done in the time of emergency. But India would always take an exception under Article 4 of ICCPR, right, which talks about the derogation clause. The other thing about ICCPR is under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, there is a mechanism wherein individuals can file a complaint, what you call as the individual complaint mechanism under ICCPR. But the problem is, this is mentioned under the optional protocol of ICCPR, but unfortunately India is not a signatory to the optional protocol to ICCPR. So any individual who wants to file a case against India in ICCPR cannot do it because India is not a signatory to the optional protocol of ICCPR. But there is another mechanism in place, that is interstate complaint mechanism under ICCPR. I mean, that can be invoked provided the acts of India, the actions of India affects other state. So that is quite unlikely. I think I have answered your question. I think Ron. So your question is again regarding the derogation clause. This is a very important point that you raise, that during a time of emergency, a state is always entitled to suspend human rights. But my problem here is to what extent the human rights could be suspended. Now there are certain criteria that needs to be followed. As I was mentioning in my lecture, the suspension of human rights has to be based on non-discrimination. It has to be based on non-arbitrariness. It has to be based on principle of proportionality. This is a very important principle when it comes to international human rights. Principle of proportionality. Now, freedom of movement, the government has suspended in the name of national security, but on the other hand, you have right to life, which is also considered to be one of the fundamental or one of the sacrosanct rights. So government, I think, has to find a balance between freedom of movement and right to life, right. Case number 8, I'm not sure, maybe I'll do some research on that and I'll get back to you. Fine. Pankaj Kumar. Now, you need to remember that human rights are rights which are provided by the states to the citizens. Now, when this right is provided by the states to the citizen, the state can suspend human rights. But there is no blanket suspension. There should not be a blanket suspension of human rights. There has to be certain proportionality maintained when there is a suspension of human rights. So what I feel is government restricting this freedom of movement, freedom of assembly, it's fine, it's fine, but it has to be done on a very, very logical footing. It has to be done with consultation and it has to be communicated with the people. Now, the other point I would like to raise here is right to access to information. Now, when the lockdown was called out, people were given hardly 4 days to pack up the bags and get ready for the lockdown. So, we did not have sufficient information, what you call as access to information. And access to information is again a human rights which is mentioned under ICCPR and which is also codified through various international conventions. Now, what I feel is again, Asia does not have a regional human rights mechanism like Europe, Inter-America or American states or Africa. Asian states do not have a regional human rights mechanism to settle disputes pertaining to human rights. So, it's high time that we introduce something like a regional human rights court in Asia to look into the ongoing crisis in Asia, right? Okay. Now, Saumitro Chakravarti. So, your question is Chinese nationals are being targeted. I completely agree with you, and I'm also of the view that Chinese people are targeted inside China itself. For instance, there were a lot of doctors who wanted to disclose the events in China. I think they were reprimanded by the government and they were strictly warned. And even the Chinese government is accused of suppressing its own people. Now, Chinese people getting discriminated abroad, again that is quite unfortunate, and it's unfortunate to see that the people are taking, governments across the globe and people are taking their anger against the people. This is totally unwarranted and this should be stopped. That is what I feel. And if this continues to happen, you need to remember that human rights can also be applied extraterritorially. Now, earlier notion when human rights came into the forefront, human rights was confined to domestic laws. Now, human rights has extraterritorial application, that is, it can be applied even beyond the borders, right? Yeah. So, whatever is done has to be condemned. I think Reena Kumar, what are the dimensions of human rights in response to COVID-19 pandemic? So, I mean, there are various kinds of human rights which are being violated, but the thing is, it's too early to bring or institute a proceedings against anyone unless everything is taken care and unless everything is brought under control. It's too early to say the human rights implication of this pandemic. But what I could say is there are few cases which are pending in the European Court of Human Rights, right? There is a case involving Surrey County, wherein it was said that because of this lockdown, an individual was not able to move freely outside. So he filed a case in the European Court of Human Rights accusing the government of violating the freedom of movement. But the court categorically stated during the time of emergency, the states have certain entitlement wherein it can suspend human rights. So it is a subtle balance between the rights of the individuals and collective right. So this is a very important point that I like to stress, that there has to be a balance that needs to be maintained between individual right and collective right. Right. So it is up to the government to take a call on this. So Tapas Roy, what will be the role of human rights in the event of refusing corona patient as well as other patients suffering from different disease in our country? This is again a policy matter. This has to be, the policy matter has to be decided by the government. Now I'll draw a similar analogy with refugee law. Now there is a lot of allegation against the government of India that the government is not allowing the Rohingya refugees to enter India. The point is, India does not have a law on refugee, and India is well within its right, the government is well within its right to protect its frontier or its borders. So it's purely a policy matter which the government has to decide, and even if the matter is brought up in the Supreme Court or any adjudicatory forum, I feel it will be in favor of the government. So Pankaj Kumar, recent media reports have shown a surge in domestic violence cases across the globe during the period of lockdown. What's your opinion in this respect of human rights? Again, the point which I mentioned earlier, that is individual right versus collective right. Now, it's true that there is this outbreak. I mean, there is this news that domestic violence is on the rise, but I mean, in the time of emergency, the government can do only limited. I mean, the government, these are matters, I mean, I'm not saying these are matters which are in the periphery, but the government should look into it. I mean, seriously. I would say there are a lot of issues on human rights that government needs to look into. So I see this is also one such issue. Okay, Sri Ghosh. So your question is, US is reporting atrocities on minorities. How far is it tenable under present circumstances? Now, talking about the rights of the minorities, unfortunately, international law does not define the term minorities. I mean, although the International Law Commission has appointed special rapporteur to define the term minority, international law has not defined the term minorities. And this is quite unfortunate that the minorities are being subjugated to human rights violation. This is a phenomenon that we see all across the globe. For instance, there is an allegation that in India, Muslims are being targeted in the garb of this virus. So minorities have to be protected, and it's high time that this particular institution, that is ECOSOC. ECOSOC is one of the organs in the United Nations, the Economic and Social Council, has to take up the matter seriously, and it should advise the government on how it needs to protect the rights of the minorities. But unfortunately, when it comes to the rights of the minorities, the UN has played a very, has shown reluctance. And UN, the institutions like ECOSOC has to take up the lead in protecting the rights of the minority. Along with that, NGOs, the NGOs like Amnesty, NGOs like Human Rights Watch, the local NGOs have to come forward and pressurize or lobby with the government to find an alternative or to formulate a solution for this global tragedy that we are seeing today. Today. So, Prishti, your question is, a lot of patients suffering from other diseases other than corona are turned down by the hospital authorities. How are the rights violated? Okay. Now, this is a very interesting question. Now, the WHO guidelines, the World Health Organization guidelines says for every 1,000 there has to be a doctor, right? The ratio is 1:1,000. That is what the WHO guideline says. But unfortunately, in India, that is not the case. In India, the ratio of patients to doctor is 1:3,500 and something. So there would be scarcity of doctors treating patients for other diseases like chronic diseases like cancer. But there has to be a mechanism that needs to be eked out by the government to resolve the crisis. I would say there has to be a proper management of resources, and high time that the government communicates whatever it does to the people. This is one of the criticisms that I have against the government, that the government is not communicating to the general public. So increased or fostering of communication can go a long way in creating a situation wherein the panic-like situation is brought down, right? Okay, Faiz, your question is on how doctors are to be protected. I think the World Health Organization again has come up with the guidelines on the roles and responsibilities of the health workers. I would suggest you to read that report of the WHO, which mentions certain certain minimum protection that needs to be given to the doctors, especially in terms of insurance. I think doctors are being insured a cover of 50 lakh rupees. If anything happens to their lives, they are given this insurance cover. Secondly, they are being transported. There is an allegation by the doctors that they are not given transport facility to commute from hospitals to their home. So government is providing transport. That is one good welcoming sign. Secondly, it is providing accommodation. That is one, and the government needs to provide protection equipments to the COVID warriors. I think this is something that is lacking today. We need good quality equipments to protect the frontline warriors, that is doctors. I think J.I.M. Giri, I think I have answered your question. So Chinese nationals being maltreated outside China is something that is unwarranted, and this has to be done away with. And when I talk about human rights again, human rights is universal, it's applicable to everyone. It is applied even extraterritorially. So even if Indian citizen is harassed outside India, he has the right to protect in terms of human rights. So this is something that is uncalled for, and targeting in terms of nationality, community, religion, race has to be done away with. So I strongly condemn, and we have sufficient laws in place, but the only thing is the enforcement part, right? Okay, your question is, are the Supreme Court of India's guidelines being strictly complied with? I would say not really, not really. For instance, one of the guidelines given by the Supreme Court, if I am right, that private labs have to treat the patient free of cost. And this is something that cannot happen in a country like India. So that particular guideline is not being complied with. Secondly, there are other guidelines in terms of protection of migrant workers, in terms of providing minimum income, etc. I think government has not done sufficiently, although it has taken a kind of brazen attempt to fix the entire situation. Now you need to understand the population of India is huge, is humongous. So it's literally impossible to satisfy the needs of everyone, right? Yeah. So Sri goes right to health. So right to health again is a human rights. It's a fundamental right, and this is a right which is non-derogable, which is codified under Article 12 of ICCPR. This is something that needs to be looked into seriously, and this is where I'm of a strong or firm opinion that there needs to be something like universal healthcare. Universal healthcare wherein it can provide access to health facilities to everyone, irrespective of age, irrespective of gender, etc. There needs to be universal healthcare that needs to be introduced by the government so that the medical procedures are done free of cost. As of now, testing for COVID-19 require, I think the cost is nearly 4 to 5,000 rupees per individual. So it's an exorbitant amount, and that is part of the reason why not adequate testing is done in India. So the cost has to come down. Maybe the private sector and the government needs to sit down and discuss on this. Right? So have we made any progress in reducing human rights violation? It's I would say too early to say anything on this, but I find a lot of media outlets criticize, especially foreign media outlets like Al Jazeera, BBC, Reuters, criticizing India for its inactive stance when it comes to safeguarding human rights. But you need to understand we are working under tremendous logistic constraint, and the government, I feel, is trying its best, but in certain pockets like Northeast, in Kashmir, in Delhi, it has not done a lot to curb the spread of the virus. So what can be done is the government can consult this institutions like the National Human Rights Commission. So under the Protection of Human Rights Act, there is this institution, that is National Human Rights Commission. And one of the functions of the National Human Rights Commission under if I'm right, Section 12, which says the National Human Rights Commission can recommend the government on measures to be adopted. So institutions like National Human Rights Commission have to come forward and step up and provide suggestions to the government on the ground reality. So that can be done. So Pankaj Kumar, in the United States, some have claimed that discrimination is spreading faster than coronavirus. They have reported of individuals in Asian descent. Okay. Now, discrimination, I would say, is an universal phenomenon. It happens everywhere, all across the globe. Now, the only thing is, because of this pandemic, discrimination is being proliferated. It is true that Indians or Afro-Asian people are sent back from the European states, but this is an universal thing that needs to be looked into. Okay. I believe India's step to contain COVID-19 have failed to curb anti-Muslim rhetoric. What's your opinion on this? Now, I'll take you to the report of the Secretary General of the United Nations, who has categorically said that in the time of this crisis, we all need to stand together and eradicate this violence. But unfortunately, I would say certain sections in the media, certain sections in the media have perpetuated fake news wherein it is said that Muslims in places like Delhi, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh have been targeted. Now, if that is the case, this has to be condemned. This has to be stopped. But the sense I get is there are a lot of fake news that is spreading around. So media has to play a very important role in sensitizing the people with regard to the virus itself, educating the people with regard to the virus, and informing the people on the latest development in technology. I'm sure that in the coming days we would develop a vaccine which could tackle the crisis. I mean, that would take another 3-4 months. But meanwhile, there needs to be, the government has to look into this seriously, the question of fake news, right? So this is somewhat a personal question, Pankaj. Would you please share how you developed interest in this area? So when I started reading something on COVID-19 and international law, I found there are a lot of gray areas, and common people are not aware of certain protections which are available to them. So that inspired me to read a lot on COVID-19 and international law. But my understanding is confined to international human rights and COVID-19. I have not taken it much forward. I mean, you could argue on labor law and COVID-19. You can bring in the issue of sports law and COVID-19 in terms of laws of employment. You could bring in the rights of constitutional law and COVID-19. So COVID has a very universal character, that COVID-19 or this corona outbreak can be clubbed with any branch of law. And the branch which I was specifically or particularly interested was human rights and international law. And I found in the coming days, when the outbreak eases down, there are chances that plenty of litigations would be filed in the courts across the globe with regard to this outbreak. And it is interesting to note that if you are aware of this Jessup moot court proposition, Jessup is considered to be one of the premier moots in international law, and it's considered to be the king of moots, Jessup moot. So the next year, the moot proposition is based on this pandemic. So the international community is taking up the matter very seriously, understandably, because the casualty has touched nearly 3 lakhs, and I'm hopeful that in the coming days the outbreak can be checked or regulated. Okay, Ananya. So Ananya, question is, does the whole responsibility lies on the applicant state who brings the allegation in terms of bringing a suit? Okay. So your question is regarding the burden of proof. Now, regarding the burden of proof in the ICJ, any state which makes an allegation against the other state has the responsibility to prove, right? Which is one of the cardinal principles that you find in the Indian Evidence Act. The same applies to International Court of Justice. But the only issue with dragging China to the ICJ is it's a cumbersome process to establish the jurisdiction. China being dragged to the ICJ, in fact, there is not even a single case where I have seen in the ICJ where China is one of the parties, right? So it would be safe to say that China has not been brought or dragged to the ICJ even once. In the course of 60 years of International Court of Justice, I have not seen China being taken to the ICJ even once. So I'm very skeptical about this, states dragging China to the ICJ, because at the end of the day, China would retaliate. That is also at the back of the minds, right, of the states who are willing to test China, right? So my only suggestion to the policy makers is this. Uh, the government has to come up and communicate to the general public. People today are not aware of the position that we are in, especially with regard to the lockdown. And secondly, the government has to protect the rights of the migrant workers. Migrant workers are at loss, and it is said that they are dying on a daily basis. The government should protect these migrant workers and facilitate necessary arrangements so that their lives are protected and safeguarded. And thirdly, the government has to play a very proactive role in protecting the COVID frontline warriors, that is doctors, and who are engaged in this battle against the deadly virus. So if all these are done and people parallelly starts respecting the mandate of the government, the virus can be brought under check. But the government also needs to understand that it has to maintain a balance between national security and the protection of human rights. Okay. So I think I'll wrap up the session. So it has been a pleasure interacting with you. I would like to thank your dynamic faculty member Ananya Chakravarti for inviting me for this talk. Thank you for that. And personally doing research on the topic, I was able to learn a lot. So this is an issue that can only proliferate in the coming days in terms of the law on the subject. So I hope that you stay updated with the recent developments, and I would also urge you to write a lot on these areas. There are a lot of loopholes, there are a lot of areas that needs to be explored, which as a student of law you could probably undertake to do, which would be, I would say, a great endeavor on your part. And I'm also working on a couple of articles with regard to international law and COVID-19. So hopefully it comes out well. So I would like to thank Sister Nivedita University Department of Law for giving me this opportunity. Thank you. I have not introduced myself, by the way. My name is Atul Alexander. I teach in the West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences, Calcutta. I have been the faculty there for the past 2.5 years. I teach public international law, international human rights, refugee law, and law of United Nations. So thank you all.